Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Laura K. Buzz. You may know me as someone that talks about accessibility in video games on the internet, but I'm not here alone today. I'm here talking about accessibility related stuff with someone else. Wonderful, friendly face. Would you like to introduce who you are today?
Hi everyone, my name is Arevya and I am a chronically ill and disabled content creator from Norway. I do normally a lot of TikToks, but I also do streaming, a lot about information about making accessibility easy to swallow, if we're allowed to say that, in the form of it can be a bit like a vast field and it's a lot of things to take in and understand. So I just make small bits easy to understand to make you curious about accessibility and want to like take a look at it yourself.
Wonderful. And where can people find you on the internet?
They can find me under the handle Arevya everywhere, which I am not going to spell out because I have dyslexia, and since we talk about accessibility, I can't spell in
That's okay.
English.
I'll try and remember in post to spell it and put it on the screen for people.
Good, good. Yeah, it's isn't it ironic though? Like I chose a name, which I'm okay with my name. I like my name, but I cannot spell it. I hope it's okay with like I can blame it on the fact that English is not my first language.
As someone who also is very bad at spelling and writing and grammar and all of those things, um, I got to pick my own name, and I definitely picked one I would find easy to spell. But also, I don't know why I got into writing. Writing seems like a very poor decision for me to get into as someone that does not remember where letters go in words half the time.
Yeah, every time I write like a manuscript for YouTube, like I write, and then half the page is just like red underlinings going like, no, you cannot say this, you cannot write this. And it goes like, oh,
This is what working with editors is for. I have the ideas, and they can turn it into something readable.
yes.
But yeah, so we're here generally to chat about accessibility stuff today, but specifically, we wanted to chat a little bit about PTSD today in terms of video game accessibility, which is something I suspect a lot of people will hear and go, "How's that to do with accessibility?"
So I think we can start about like what is PTSD?
Mm,
Because I think a lot of people still to this day think like, oh, you have been in war, which is
yes.
a legit thing to think
Yeah.
because a lot of people experience war, will have trauma after it, and that is a logical thing to assume. But the minority of people who has PTSD has it from war and conflict. Most of us has it for other traumatic experience, either
Mm,
that being a succession of longer traumatic events going spanning years or one single event.
mm,
And what is a bit, can I call it weird about PTSD is that it can also happen to you even though the trauma didn't affect you, but you get sort
mm,
of a bystander trauma, and the fact that you saw something and you couldn't do anything about it, and sort of that feeling of hopelessness haunts you for the rest of your life.
mm,
I myself have PTSD due to medical trauma. So since I'm chronically ill and disabled, I've been in and out of hospitals for many years. Sadly, met doctors who weren't nice to me, doctor and nurses who weren't nice to me.
mm-hmm.
And due to all the gaslighting, and everybody who are chronically ill know all of this gaslighting and all
Yeah.
that jazz you sadly meet in the medical field, I ended up getting PTSD after some procedures and have to deal with the consequences daily due to that. Though, on the other side, it is a illness that is possible to live nice with. I, after many years of therapy, think, and it's fun, ironically enough, I have a better mental health now with PTSD because mine will never go away than I had before I had PTSD because I actually got help dealing with like my mental health in general.
I think there really is something to that, and it's depressing a little bit that it's the case, but I know here in the UK, it's really hard to get mental health support until you hit a crisis point, and
Yep.
so many people I know have better mental health after their moment of crisis because they were able to start getting that help and support, be it because, the barriers to accessing it were lessened, or just the realization that they needed to go seek that help, health and support. It's not a fun road to get there, but whatever gets you to do the work can sometimes help on the other end a bit.
Yeah, because every time I talk about it, like I have a lot of people coming to me like I just got diagnosed, that feel like I have like this big burden or this like big stone on my back and I
Mm.
just want to like throw it away, but I can't do it. And I keep thinking. And I'm just like, well, after I never were able to get rid of it, it won't happen. We all need to face hospitals and medical field all the time. It's
Mm.
part of life. So I will never, even through exposure and stuff, it just doesn't help for me, but I can deal with it. It's like a set. I have so many tools now and a set like way of dealing with things. So even though it's hard for me, it's okay to deal with it because it's a sort of like a drawer. I open a drawer, that is the problem, and then when I'm done, I'll close that drawer, and then it doesn't affect me more than that. Whenever that sneaks itself up, I have the tools to just close it, and yeah,
Yeah.
it's
I I think there's a lot of disabilities that have that sort of thing in mind of initially when you learn you have a disability, sometimes that experience of this is never gonna go away, and that can be quite scary until you come to terms with it's never gonna go away, but I know what it is now and I can find the tools to deal with it and I can work through it.
I like that.
And I understand why it's so scary. Like it's not one to one, obviously, but I had similar experiences when I got diagnosed with autism, and having that moment of this is going to be with me forever is initially quite scary. It's like it feels like when you hear that, it's like this will never get better, and that's not what it means at all. Because
No.
with a lot of these things, it's you've learnt the name for it, you can work on it now, and you can get it under control in a way you couldn't. Because like getting diagnosed doesn't mean you have the thing now. You had it before. It just means you have a name
Yeah.
for it, and you know how to do stuff about it.
I like that because yeah, you had it before. That I like because sort of for me, every time I've gotten any diagnostic mentally or
Mm.
physically or disability or stuff like that, it sort of it gives you a hook to put things on. It's like I got anxiety the other day and I couldn't get rid of it, and it turns out that it was just my flight and fright reflex that was triggered by something completely different. But then I was just like, oh yeah, but I am mentally ill, so I need to now give myself the time to relax and do all of these things I know I need to do. And so having the tools and having the understanding of how the illness affects you is like a really good power to have.
Indeed. So yeah, we've talked a little bit about like the basics of what PTSD is. How does that relate to video games? That's I suspect there are going to be people wondering that.
So relating it to video games is that PTSD has for a lot of people triggers. So you see something, you hear something, or you get a feeling that triggers a response in your body correlating to the trauma you experience. An example for me is that due to like the hospital thing I have, I played Amnesia on stream, and not to spoil too much, but there is a scene of something happening to someone's body.
There is a
We could
scene
just
with
say that.
medical elements. Yep.
Yes. And for me, it is okay to see it, but I can't hear it because for me, like sounds of being in a
Hmm.
hospital or sounds of that reminds me too much about the experience I had. So I was lucky enough for that time to have a chat or my chat to say to me, "This will happen. Remember to take off your headset."
Hmm.
So I had to take off the headset to be able to continue the game and then not getting triggered and then having a problem with that. It is important to understand that triggers doesn't necessarily just mean getting a problem there and then and getting like a panic attack. It can be that for some people they get triggered, get a panic attack. But for me, it's like I get this sinking feeling of
Hmm.
doom and then it just builds and builds and builds and builds. So I can get triggered and then have the problem, say, 2 days later, of my body just completely shutting down because the feeling of doom is just too overwhelming.
Yeah, trauma is can be nasty like that in that it's not
How
always
fun.
conveniently like helpfully happening at a moment where you can go, I can tell exactly what caused this and it's having its effect right now.
Yes.
I know for myself, I don't have a diagnosis of PTSD, but I definitely have things that I have trauma responses to. I know for me, a big one was the first time I played through the original Life is Strange. As someone that went through an experience of not being able to talk someone out of committing suicide, that interactive video game series has a scene where someone is going to kill themselves and you are in control of whether they do or not, based on your actions. And I failed that interaction and then got told that 80% of people were successful at saving her, and I was in the 20% that sucked and couldn't do it. And like, I get what you mean about that looming sense of trauma, because that didn't get me in the moment, but that was one of those things that like over days and days just kind of sat with me. And trauma's sucky like that sometimes, in how it just really needles it, just kind of weighs you down a bit.
Yes.
It's not fun.
No. And it is, I think, the Hollywood typical effect of like somebody coming home from war and then I hear something and then they just like goes into this sort of trance. But for most of us, it isn't that. It's just more that it triggers something and then we just don't know what to do with our body because I get like you could tell me or you could tell my body there is a lion in this room, and my
Hmm.
body would just like go like ugh, and react according to the fact that I was lying in this room. But there isn't a lion in the room.
Hmm.
It doesn't exist here in no way. So why would it be?
And
When my body, even though my brain says to me like, "Hey, this isn't true. It isn't happening now. What you're feeling and what you're thinking isn't true." My body's just like, "Hell no, there might be a line somewhere. I am going to react."
and and when it's a threat that isn't there, it makes it hard because you can't just go away from the threat. Because the
No.
threat's not in a physical space you can get yourself away
Yeah.
from.
Like if I go into another room, it's just like, yeah, but the lion might be here as well. My body says to me, and like, so that's the same with when I play video games because I want to enjoy them. I want to have a good time, relax. For me, video games is a way to like have fun. And it's not fun if I am going to go into a game and sit on the edge and go like, am I going to be triggered or not? And that's
Hmm.
the thing as well. Like just the thinking or feeling of like, oof, am I going to be triggered is also hard to deal with. That
Hmm.
in itself is part of the problem as well. You sit there and go like, oh no, am I going to have a bad day today due to this?
Yeah.
And of course, I know some people say like, but then just don't play games. But
It's always the
I,
response. Ugh.
yeah, so then just don't play that kind of games. But I'm just like, but I like horror games.
Yeah.
I think horror games are really, really fun. I like the feeling of like fear and doom and all that jazz, but when it's controlled, because it
Hmm.
is different. It's like how you watch a shark movie and you like have to take your feet up on like away from the floor because you're pretty sure that there might be a shark there, and it's like that feeling, but you know it's silly, and then it's just fun, and I want that. I just don't want to have the extra added on. So
Yeah. I've had conversations with people about horror games specifically before, and had those conversations of like, why do you play a game if it's in a genre that might even possibly contain something that's bad for you? And I think the way I always talk to people about it is like, most people who go into horror aren't looking to be genuinely like unsettled. I think, there are some people who that's what they're there for, but I think most people are like, I want to engage with that sort of tension and fear in a safe space where I, on a physical level, know that nothing I'm seeing can harm me.
yeah,
And it's explaining that, like, hey, for some people with some people will go to horror and everything will be fine except for one thing where the body goes, this isn't pretend anymore. And because you have that response to one thing doesn't mean you don't, in every other context, still enjoy that whole, ooh, what's going to happen? I know I'm safe, but it's still scary.
yeah, and it's the excitement, and it is like sort of the, oh yeah, like I don't know. Yeah, but what then can games do to help us who has triggers? If we just take that as a general thing,
Hmm.
triggers. What could games do to help us, do you think?
Well, I think the obvious answer, I suspect you'll agree with me on this, is content warnings. And
Yeah.
not just content warnings, but good, robust content warnings that are well presented to the player.
Yeah. I think there is, for once, I really, really enjoy sites like Does the Dog Die, which is a site where you
Yes.
can look up, yes, look up like content. Will something like this happen in the game? But I also think it's important on the devs to put it on their website or
Yeah.
on Steam. Like,
Yes.
give us content warnings on Steam, like, this is going to include this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think it's really cool in game when they gives us content warnings before it happens.
Mm.
So it's like 3 stages of like looking it up yourself, having the information given to you, and then having the information before it happens, so you can sort of prepare yourself.
Yeah, there's a couple of examples of games I always go to for like well implemented content warnings, both like developer provided outside of the game and then inside of the game. I like to talk about Tell Me Why, which was a Don't Nod game involving a trans man protagonist and some mysterious supernatural goings on that was happening. But that game's developers put out a set of content warnings, I think 6 weeks before the game had even released, that were like full spoilers. We will tell you like which chapter of the game things come up in, common questions you might have. Do you have any further questions? You can email us and we'll answer stuff before the game was even out. And I really respect how upfront they were about those content warnings. But in terms of ones that are like in the game, the example I always think of is there's a game called Ikenfell, which has really well implemented content warnings that can be looked up in advance, but can also be set to happen right before a moment occurs, and the game will pause and it will go, here is a thing that is about to happen. Would you like a bit more specific information about like what exactly is going to go on? Do you want to skip it or do you want to go through it? And like that degree of specificity and control and ability to go, I know what's coming and whether it's going to be a problem for me, I think is a really good implementation of that kind of
Yeah, I
thing.
really enjoy that. I think Dead Space also did that, similar to that, and I think it's such a good way of doing it. For me, as I've come so far in my way of working with myself and with my illness, I can now handle things if I'm prepared. So like
Hmm.
I have things that I can do that it's okay for me to see this, because then I just like I know it's going to happen. The worst I know is when it gets sprung up on me. Like
Hmm.
I'm not ready for this, and it feels like out of a left field. Like of course, if you play Dead Space, of course, like that happens.
Yeah.
You sort of know it will happen, but there are, as you said, Life is Strange. I when I came into Life is Strange, I did not think that they would go so serious on the topics,
Yeah.
because we didn't have had anything like it before. So it's just like a yeah, I sort of when I came into it the first time thought it was more like a cozy game,
Hmm.
because it sort of was presented that way. Which was not in the fault of the developers. It was just more that I didn't know better.
I
So
get
it
what you
is,
mean though. I felt the same.
yes. And but it is hard as well though, because
Hmm.
as much as I love trigger warnings and content warnings, it is hard because people can have triggers for so many things. I have had PTSD now going on for almost 10 years. And
Hmm.
when I started having it, trigger warnings for medical stuff was not a thing.
It's one of those things where I'm glad that developers are over time realizing quite how broad the range of things that can be upsetting for players is, and are thinking about that in creative ways. We are seeing really good examples of one thing over the last couple of years I've seen become more common is games going, "Hey, do you like?" Have you lost a parent and it's going to be upsetting for like an in-game parent that's just called mum or dad to be contacting you? Like things like that. We're seeing developers start to be aware that there is like a broader spectrum of things that could, be worth avoiding. But no game is ever going to be perfect in that regard. And I think that like we can look at what are the common things, what are the things that most commonly come up. Listen to your community and be communicative about like what are things that aren't just one-off cases of people being bothered by, and sort of doing the best work you can on that. But I think the biggest thing is if you have content warnings, you have to make sure that like the things you have content warnings for, you are rock solid on like actually being accurate about.
Yes. I saw once I played a game and it just said trigger warnings. And they're just like,
Yeah,
trigger warnings for what? Is it
yeah,
spiders? Is it death? What is it trigger warning for? And I
yeah.
understand the devs try their best and like kudos to them to have it. But I was just like, okay, you tried, but
Yeah, like an example I think about of content warnings done in like a not ideal way is the game Doki Doki Literature Club, which also to the note of like it's difficult because I respect the fact they have content warnings in there, given the fact that giving content warnings gives away the fact that that game is a horror game nestled in something disguising itself not as a horror game, but that game had like very vague content warnings for specific categories at the start. Like it would say like blood, no more specifics. And that would be, something and not the worst. But there were instances in that game where, it would pause and go, this thing is about to come up, even if it wasn't very specific. Blood, there's about to be blood, not going to be specific. But then there would be points where blood would come up, not content warninged. And I'm
oh
like, that's
no.
where you have a problem, is where you've
Yeah.
said, we will give you a heads up in advance when this thing is about to come, meaning that you can approach it knowing it's coming and prepare yourself as you were talking about. Like sometimes it's okay if you know it's coming, but to then fail to be thorough and to
Yeah.
have it sneak up on you when you thought you were safe to approach it like knowingly, that can be like more damaging than just not bothering to content warn in the first place because it tells someone you can let your guard down. Ooh, psych, here it is.
Yeah, I think that is something I try to talk about a lot when I do game reviews,
Mm.
especially when it comes. It can do a parallel to like visual accessibility in the form of having big text. Because one of the things I often say is that games doesn't have bigger enough text, and especially boxes
Mm.
aren't big enough. And when I've talked about devs with it, some things they often say is that yeah, but if it's too big, it will cover content. So like then you won't see the design. And then I try to explain back that yes, but for the people who needs it, they don't care
Yeah.
because the importance is to see what is written. And I think it's sort of the same with trigger warnings. If you go in to a setting and get to read trigger warnings, like you don't need to have them front and frontal. You can have like a button
Yeah.
so you have to open and then it says this will contain spoilers. You can either have a spoiler-free one and a not spoiler-free one. But for us who needs it pretty well explained out, I would not play a game because I'm spoiled, but I would not play a game if I'm
Mm.
afraid to be triggered. And that's the thing.
Exactly.
Like you will always have players go and like spoil themselves and stuff like that, but most players don't do that. Like most gamers will play a game to have fun, so they don't on purpose do things to not have fun.
And I mean, even if someone who didn't need trigger warnings went in and looked at the spoilers in the trigger warning, content warning menu, like, so what? That hasn't harmed anyone if that person decided, I want to know the spoilers before I play it.
Yeah.
It that the worst case scenario is someone knowingly and willingly spoils a narrative for themselves for no reason, and the best case scenario is, as you say, have maybe have degrees of how spoil myself a little bit. Okay, I need a bit more information. Spoil me a bit more,
Mhm.
and knows, okay, I know when a thing is coming and the specifics about it to know whether it's going to be okay for me or if I need to mitigate it somehow.
But I also do feel for devs sometimes there is a tricky way to go about it. I think a lot, especially when I talked about earlier, the fact that sometimes people just say trigger warnings
Yeah.
and not like what or content warnings. Because I I understand them to some degree because they are like, but we don't want to say it in case it triggers you. And I can understand. I don't think it comes from a place of malice what
Hmm.
they're doing it. It comes from a place of not understanding how the system of content and trigger warnings actually works. So I think also it is on us who wants to talk about it and works to talk about it to be open and like tell them how this actually works.
Agreed. I think pulling back to something you said very early on when talking about PTSD, like I've known people who have had the type of PTSD where something happens and they go glassy-eyed and are flashing back to something, and I know that that's not everyone's experience. I know it's not yours, but it's one of those that I think a lot of developers that's the only vision they have of PTSD, and I think that gives them that association of, oh, what if that idea of I don't know anyone with PTSD, but what if I mention the word and they start having flashbacks? And it's about getting those conversations going so that people who are making games and trying to put these kind of warnings into games aren't doing it from a place where all they know is the fireworks are going off and the soldiers having flashbacks that they saw in a film once, but that they've spoken to people with PTSD and gone, having spoken to several people with the condition, what is or is not likely to be an issue and what is or is not likely to be helpful, rather than just sort of making those assumptions.
I do think that is a smart way of looking at it, because with every diagnostic and every illness, whatever it is a big, vast field. If you have talked to one person with a
Mm,
condition, you have talked to one person with a
yeah.
condition. And I think, and I understand that that also can be scary because, like, I our experience will differ so much, and but it is okay for devs and for everybody else to also understand that two things can be correct at the same time. Some games just won't be able to make accessible for people with specific PTSD.
Yeah.
If you have a war game and you get triggered by war sounds and in general stories about war, then that game might not be for you, and that is okay. No game can be 100% accessible.
And I think that's part of the thing is recognizing that like most people with conditions like PTSD are gonna know if you've got war PTSD, this game's not gonna be for me. And I don't think anyone's expecting developers of a Call of Duty or whatever to make it necessarily accessible to people for whom war generally is going to be a trigger.
Yeah.
But I also recognize that like just because that is the case doesn't mean there aren't things you could do within that game that might still be helpful for some people. Like
Yes.
being able to, I don't know, have separate sliders for volume for bullets and explosions, and being able to turn those down in the mix so they're not quite so all encompassing might be enough for someone.
Was just about to say that because that is like the example I have. And the thing with like sound sliders, which is
Mm,
perfect, is that they help us with PTSD, but they also help people with like tinnitus. Is that what you call it
yeah,
in English?
yeah,
Or the beeping sound in their ears. So
yeah.
there might be sounds they need to turn off. Um, so it helps like a big spectrum of people and a lot of your players, not just one specific um, um, part of
Yeah,
yeah, subcategory of gamers. It can help like a really big and large field of your gamers. And also I think in all of this, just be upfront of what your game is about. Like be honest about what the end user, the gamer, is actually going to experience.
yeah.
Because it can also be annoying. Like, say you start a game and you play it, and then you have sort of a sunk cost feeling in the form of like, but I spent 8 hours, but now it's a
Yeah.
part of it I just can't go through. And then, okay, yeah, you can have a friend play it for you or a family member, but there is an importance in a feeling of being independent in all of
Hmm.
this. For me, at least, being independent is a really, really big part of my life, a really important part of my life.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would be really, and then it can turn into being annoyings with the developers and the studio and stuff like that. But if I never were to play it, I would just go like, meh. But if I have spent a lot of time in it and then there is a barrier that is so big that I can't get past it, you get annoyed.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
There's an example of that I think about a lot that comes up frequently enough that I'm surprised developers generally haven't picked up on this being a thing they should address yet. But people with arachnophobia who get, 80% of the way into a video game and suddenly there's a boss that's a huge spider and a bunch of small spiders, and there's no option to get around that fact for this very common phobia, and they have that moment of, well, I've played almost all of this game and my options now are have someone else continue it for a minute for me, or I just have to stop playing this game that I was really enjoying. And sometimes there is that degree of like, as we said, there's no knowing every potential trigger that could exist for phobias, for PTSD, for various conditions. But there are things you can go. What are the common things?
Yeah.
And if something is like a common occurrence or a common enough one that like it comes up frequently, go, is there anything we can do to at the very least make certain things skippable for certain players so that they don't have to give up that autonomy and can just keep going with the experience they're enjoying.
And I also think I think that is a good way of looking at it. And I will always think it's okay for developers to have their way of like autonomy. If they want to have a giant spider in the
Yeah,
game as one of the boss, and you don't want to have it be able to skip it,
yeah,
because
it,
sort of what I can call the from software mentality,
yeah,
where like this is what we are and this is what we're going to deliver, and I like
yeah.
okay, okay, you
Just
do that,
just be
but
open
then be
about what it
open
is.
about it.
Yeah,
Yes, because like then you can just say to people, but this is what we're going to deliver you, and that is that. We are not going to be accessible to this.
yeah,
And I am okay with that. We have enough games for I wish of course that every game
yeah.
will try everything, but that isn't realistic. So then just be open about it.
Exactly. Like in that example, if you're gonna have your big giant spider boss and not have any way to skip it, have somewhere where someone can look up on your website, hey, does your game have big giant spiders? Oh, it does. Okay, I won't play it if you're not gonna be accessible to me, but
Yeah.
at least you've saved me from getting that far into the game and then realizing it's not for me. Like
Yeah,
just
because
be open about the stuff you're going to include, either so that like people know what you've put in place to help them, also they know you're not going to support them, and that's fine. I won't play this one.
and you also save yourself a really either angry mail,
Yeah,
Twitter or Reddit of somebody going, I paid $80 for this. I played it so long that I can't return it, but now I can continue. And then they're angry at you. Um, so like it's a win-win situation, I feel like.
yeah. And
Trigger content warnings, win-win for everyone.
I think I understand being worried about spoiling your piece of media, but I think generally speaking, if people have issues with certain type of content, give them the tools they need to know what's coming up so they can make informed decisions at the very least. It would be wonderful if every video game had, best practices for this is what's coming and here's very specific information about when and like what it will include, and here's tools to either skip it or at least know when it's coming so you can compose yourself. That would be great, but at the very least, go, hey, these things are commonly problems for people. We've got them in our game. There you go, you know it. Like
Yeah.
that much gets a lot of the way to making things, at least making it so that people can make accessible choices.
Yeah, and I think that is the important thing. It's all about choice. It's all about options. It's all about making sure everybody involved is okay and happy with it. And I also think what like if I have like a future vision of what I would like to see is
Hmm.
that like places where you buy games had the possibility to just sort out games that has the developers could just add it in, say to Steam, and then they could
Hmm.
just add a bunch of triggers from a list, easy done, easy, really, really easy for them. And
I
then we who needs it could just sort it.
I feel like there is a very easy way that step could be done, and it would be at the video game age rating classification stage. Like if we
Yes.
could, we already have, warnings on the back of game boxes for like, hey, this game is a 15 because it has sexual content, bloody violence, or whatever. Um, if we could incorporate, like, look, here is a list of common things that can be issues for people. Look up on the ratings classification website which things they saw it had.
Yeah.
Something like that would be, doesn't feel like it would be that difficult to make available
No,
to people.
but I also think that then we can like send the ball to sort of like PlayStation
Mm,
Store, Steam, GOG, all of these places, because we
yeah,
know other media does it. Like
yeah,
I know a lot of like people who make like fan fictions online. A
yes,
lot of these are able to like sort from everything
yeah,
your grandma, your dog, for everything you can even imagine.
yeah,
You can sort it out of. So there is possibilities. There are ways of doing it. There are
yeah,
ways of looking it up to make it easier for everybody involved. But
yeah,
I do think just somebody needs to just like take the dive. And I hope we will see it from like GOG or from like Steam,
yeah.
giving the developers those that easy way out.
I think we're getting toward that world. Like, I don't think it's imminently on the horizon necessarily, but I think, we're in a world now where both Xbox and PlayStation, at least for their first party titles, have accessibility tags on their store
Yeah.
pages where developers, it doesn't have to be first party games. Some third party developers
Mm,
will submit a list of accessibility tags from a list that apply to their game. And you could very easily do something similar for, common content warnings. Just have,
yeah.
here is a list of them. Are any of these in your game? We can list on the store page that they're there. and make
Yeah,
them easy for people to find. Like that kind of upfront information that you can find at the point of digital sale of a game without having to go elsewhere to look for it is starting to become normalized.
yeah,
And that is a really good stepping stone for being able to suggest that kind of thing to, Xbox or PlayStation. Hey, here are some other checkboxes you could also offer developers.
yeah. And I think it's the way to go and just a win-win for everyone if we add more like that.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think this is probably a good place for us to start wrapping up. Did you have anything else you wanted to say while you're here about PTSD in video games, I guess?
I think it's just that if you have a friend you know can struggle with, if not PTSD, just trauma, video games are a wonderful way also to help somebody. Like
Mm.
for me, if I know I have this imminent doom, or if I get more like an acute sense of panic, video games can be a wonderful way of me with friends connecting, calming down, and having fun. So if you have a friend that struggles with that, maybe find some fun games together that can be sort of like a quote unquote safe space. A fun game where you can just focus on the game and not all the feelings that is bubbling up in your body to so that you can come to a place where you can actually deal with it. So games on negative side, but they are also a really, really good tool for people like me to handle whatever happens in my life.
Wonderful. And yeah, before we wrap up, once again, where can people find you on the internet?
They can find me everywhere under the name Arevya. I am on every social media there is. And you can find me there. And if you want to learn more about accessibility in gaming, yeah, come follow me.
I would highly recommend people follow your TikTok. You do wonderful entry level sort of insights into accessibility that are a great starting point for anyone wanting to go, what is accessibility? Where do we even begin on this? Your content over there is fantastic. So yeah, I think all that's left to be said is thank you everyone for watching and goodbye.
Bye.